Our story starts in about 1907, which is about the start of Mercer as well. Mercer started more or less over on the south side of Echo Lake over here, out of just basically a little section house is what they called it. It was a little tiny house that the crew that worked on the railroad would live in, and it served as a post office, general store, everything sort of place. And then the town grew and they built our nice depot that we still have over here in 1909. And our story here now starts in about 1907 when people are moving to the area. It's still new. There's only a couple permanent buildings around. And the businesses that are here are catering towards the lumberjacks and the miners and the businessmen that are up here visiting their business interests. So it's quite a different sort of tourism crowd than you would see today. It was a very rough time. There weren't necessarily people around to enforce what I would expect as common laws that you would expect from other people, and you really relied on each other to just kind of be decent or not in a lot of cases. So that was our frontier atmosphere combined with our burgeoning economy here set the grounds for the events that will unfold. This presentation that I'm doing is done on Prezi. It's a new form of presenting things I'm trying out. Just a second here, I'm going to kill the lights so the people in the crowd can see that a little bit better. There there we go, nice and dark. All right. Oh, just a second. I got to get back to the beginning. Whoa. There we go. Present. There we go. All right. So a little bit of context here. Mercer itself is never going to be a viable area for mining. We are really just lumber or tourism. That's it. And then the lumber boom boomed and started failing. And we had all these saloons and hotels and taverns and brothels that were already equipped to handle the need that prohibition came and established in the area. Second here, got our screen. Okay. So prohibition came up at the same time modern tourism was established. This, along with the area of social isolation, set up the perfect scenario for violence and chaos. There we go. Sure. It's not responding. There we go. Okay. So a little bit of background. First, to start with the people that we're going to talk about. The first character we're going to learn about is Edith Haucke, or Huck. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. It's spelled numerous ways. She was born in 1890 in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. She married Earl Short in 1907 at the age of 17. He was 27 at the time. She had 3 children that survived, one child that died at a young age due to influenza. She remarried again to a man named Joe Leslie in 1921. And she was associated with the Northern Tavern Saloon, which was kitty corner from the depot, from 1913 to 1924 in various ways. Another person we're going to learn about is Benny Mareski. Let's go back. He would be known as the bully, I would say. He was a Hurley saloon owner that would seasonally have these taverns and restaurants with quotation marks around them in Mercer, and then kind of pack up and just operate out of Hurley for the winter where there's more people and you could eke out more of an existence doing business. He eventually cohabitated a building with Edith and her second husband, Joe Leslie. We'll talk about all these more later. The second person, though, that we're really going to touch on is Earl Short. That's Edith's first husband. He was a brute by every stretch of the imagination and description out there that I can find. He was born in 1880 in Ohio and married her in 1907. They ran a lot of saloons over time before they operated the Northern. He was known for his violent problem-solving skills, I would call it. Um, and he served at one point as a fairly early constable where he was noted for clearing out the undesirables. I don't know what sort of undesirables we had in 1906 that he wouldn't be described as, so it makes you kind of wonder who he was clearing out of here. Um, the other person we're going to talk about, an interesting lady, Angus Knoll, or Mabel King was what she was better known as on the streets of Hurley, specifically Silver Street. She was arrested multiple times for vagrancy, which was a crime they would often give prostitutes when they didn't want to charge them with prostitution. And larceny because she stiffed a cab driver. And she was also arrested for defying a judge's orders once for getting kicked out of Hurley but not leaving. Interesting lady. We'll talk about her more later too. Edith's second husband, Joe Leslie, he is the original bootlegging biker. He was born in 1892 in Michigan. He was a veteran of the United States Air Corps. He worked multiple lumber jobs around Star Lake before working as a guide for Spider Lake Resort in Mantrash Waters. Eventually, he would start working for saloons as well. And then he married Edith in 1921. And he was arrested multiple times for larceny, I believe some petty change, and then stealing some clothing that he was wearing. I don't know how that went. I couldn't dive into all the rabbit holes here, and multiple prohibition violations. Notably once for getting raided and trying to stash the alcohol by throwing it out the window, only for having the bottle land in a shovel where the alcohol pooled with the glass and they were able to charge him with it. So yeah, he's a rather unlucky guy that we'll cover. Yep. And then Marion McMurney, um, the ex-wife from hell and the wicked stepmother. Don't have a lot of nice things to say about her. She was born in 1903 in Lac du Flambeau. She married Edgar Harper, one of the town's pioneering residents, who was a little bit up there in age at that time. She admitted to working at a large brothel in Rhinelander known as the Academy because they had so many pupils. And did a lot of freelancing around Mercer, apparently. All right, and her victim, her stepson, the good old boy, Melvin Harper. He was raised in Mercer, born in Mercer, went to the school here, participated in all kinds of plays, married his high school sweetheart, and then moved back to save the family business, only for the wicked stepmother to come and take care of him. But we'll touch on that story again later, too. Melvin Harper is the boy in the front driving the car there, the one in the white shirt. All right, back to the presentation. So in 1907, Earl and Edith get married, and in 1913, they open up the Northern over by the depot there, and they operate out of that for a couple years. And it's a rocky marriage. It is not a good marriage. Earl is a brute, and eventually Edith also has a bit of a drinking problem. That's a reoccurring theme you'll notice in these stories as well. So it's not a great marriage to say the least. Eventually, it comes to head in 1919 when Earl declares he wants to be separated from his wife. Um, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Before that, they owned the Hurley Hotel, and they employed a man named Joe Carr. We'll see him again later. And he was the closest thing that Earl had to a friend, and he severely assaulted him, and that was still the closest thing he had to a friend. Again, it says a lot about the guy. You see Edith here on the left, and Earl here, this large man next to her. Quite a posing figure, you could see. A bulky guy for at a time everyone was starving. All right. So they open up the Northern Hotel in 1913, and his former employee slash friend question mark opens up the restaurant slash saloon over here in this building called the Jerome. So they are neighbors. Great. Probably had a great relationship, you'd think. But over time, again, the marriage gets rocky and it comes to a head when Earl just can't stand it anymore and he goes on a bender. You see this in the newspaper here. My wife, having left my bed and board, this is to notify all persons that not be responsible for any debts contracted by her after this date. Mercer, August 20th, 1919. How's that for a divorce notice? Uh, so he goes on this bender and he is just after this woman. He is going to kill her. There is no doubt in anybody's mind that that is in his intent. First, he goes up to his former tavern that he used to own up in Hurley, called the Hurley Hotel, and raises a ruckus there, gets in a big fight, gets kicked out, and a warrant issued for his arrest. And he's still looking for his wife to some reason, and tracks her down to a farm at Weber Lake, where she also works as a cook feeding the farmhands. And she managed to run away and hide in a haystack while he's searching for her there. He finds her. He severely beats her there. She gets away and has to run across the swamp to get away from him. She escapes the night and the next day is with her friend, Mrs. Carr, because the wives of the two became friends over time as the husbands worked together. Much better friends than the husbands were. And the Carrs take her in there to hide her and keep her safe from her husband. Her husband puts one and two together eventually and tracks her down to the Northern Hotel. He, shakes down the hotel basically. There we go. Earl's gotta die. They have a final confrontation in the Jerome Hotel. Earl came into the hotel, demands to know where his wife was, cussing up and down. Joe sits calmly downstairs, says, I don't know, get out of here, man. And Earl doesn't believe him. Earl storms upstairs, and there the women are up in the living quarters, and Mrs. Carr stands in the doorway and isn't letting him through. So Earl decides to take it out, and Mrs. Carr and is yelling at her, has her hand around her neck apparently. And that's when Mr. Carr comes up the stairs with his revolver and shoots Mr. Short 6 times. I believe that's what it says there. Right there, dead. Right over behind the snowmobile shed there is where that happened. But 12 feet off the ground. And that was the end of Mr. Short. The police came and interviewed Joe or Mr. Carr there and went before a judge, and the judge said, there is no harm done here. There's no crime committed. He's dead. We're moving on with our lives. So it kind of tells you a little bit something about the reputation the guy had managed to get for himself in that short period of time. Coroner Carbonneau, I see his name quite a bit. He saw a lot of stuff in his time up here. I can't imagine the horrific things that he saw with his eyes when I go through the obituaries and these news reports. Keep an eye out for that in newspapers. So Earl dies, and then Edith assumes control of the Northern Hotel. She gets a business partner named Emil Kampke. We don't really deal with him very much because eventually in 1921, she marries Joe Leslie, the original bootlegging biker. Here we see him in the newspaper about 1913. So this happened about the same time they opened up the Northern. Joe Leslie of the Spider Lake Resort of Matchwish was in town last Friday and made an office call. A feature of Joe's visit to Hurley on this occasion was the fact that the entire trip from Matchwish here was made on his motorcycle, and he is probably the first person to make the trip over the new road on a motorcycle. So he's the first person to go from there to there on a bike. That's, something at least. Eventually he got drafted for World War I, went off and served and came back around 1917. And a couple of years later, ended up marrying Edith after meeting somehow. There we go. You can see here the nice marriage notification in the paper. Edith Short and Joe Leslie of Mercer have applied for marriage license. Lucky Joe, he can have shortcake all year. Quite a couple that like to have a good time. Joe Leslie, while out on his new auto sleigh on a trial spin Friday with his wife, lost her on the way to Manitwish. So anyone finding the stray wife, please return to Mr. Leslie, but less speed next time, Joe. So that there are other articles in there about their adventure speeding as well. They had a speeding ticket for going 45 miles an hour down Silver Street. Can you imagine doing that this day and age? They were doing that in a Model T. So it was quite something. All right. So they have this interesting relationship. They get married in 1921. Edith's children go off to live with other family members because she's not really in a position to be raising kids at that time out of the saloon, first as a single mother of all things back then to think of. So they were raised by members of the family, the Schwartzes. They were longtime Mercer residents, and they're out of the picture pretty much from here on out. Um, and eventually, she does lose the saloon. It gets taken by the court to pay basically for custody of the kids to benefit the children and that sort of thing. So that all happened about 1924 or so, and they do operating business and they start renting another restaurant on Railroad Street now. It's not standing anymore, and they rent the space and they run a saloon out of it that's got hotel beds upstairs at least, and they get some interesting inhabitants to rent those beds from them. And we're going to start touching on some of those that we know went through that building and worked out of it more or less, such as Marion McBrunny, the wicked stepmother. Um, so they had Marion McBrunny marries Edgar Harper. I believe that's his second or third wife. The first one died. The second one spent all his money and he divorced her. And this is the third one. He does not have good luck with women, to say the least. And he starts operating a saloon next to the Leslies. They do a pretty good business. They're pretty decent people. They have numerous enterprises around town. The Harpers do. There's a brother named Charlie that has the golf course that used to be down the road over by the Wolf's Den. So they're a well-known family. And somehow he ended up marrying a prostitute, but I don't know. Let's see. Anybody? Okay. Just a second here. So, anyways, just a second, I got chat up. Okay, so they're running really good business there and raising a family. And he marries this woman, and it's not great. She's an alcoholic and just running money like water, drinking away everything, not running the business, not showing up for the business. And they get a divorce. And Edgar calls up his son Melvin, who had just got this job working at the factory in Rhinelander, to say, hey, come on home. I need you to run this business for me. I'm old and I need someone to do it. And your stepmother, we're getting a divorce. So Melvin comes up and decides to do that and step in for the family. While he's doing that one morning, on the morning of April 12th, Melvin sat down for breakfast. And he finishes his breakfast, stands up, walks across the room, walks out the door, falls over dead. Right there. Everyone is confused. What would you do if randomly some relative of yours just did that? You can imagine the shock, right? So his family, they called police and everything. And they start investigating and they realize that Marion here, who was supposed to be in Lac de Flambeau, actually was around that morning. He said that he had previously, let's see here. Mr. Harper said he knew of no reason why his son should have committed suicide, why he would pour arsenic in his eggs and eat it for breakfast in front of everyone. That's not how people do that. But he did order his wife to leave the restaurant because she was neglecting her business and testified she'd been doing considerable drinking. We'll move on. Come on. There we go. We'll get to that. So she was supposed to be here, and she wasn't supposed to be here, but she was here. Mrs. Harper, after the police questioned her, confessed to residing in a nearby place for a short time, aka the Leslies, right next door. And on no occasion after a nearby short place, and no on one occasion after a stepson had taken possession, is reported to have paid the restaurant a visit for the purpose of obtaining money. So she went over there to shake down money from the stepson at one point, she admitted, and after lying about it. She was reported by the authorities to have been forcibly ejected from the restaurant by her stepson when he found her taking money out of the register at the time. She admitted she was ordered to leave her home because she had been drinking. She told the jury that she was ordered out of the home and stayed at Joe Leslie's restaurant during the day and slept at the hotel, which was the rooms upstairs. She testified that she did considerable drinking at the time. Imagine that. She admitted that she was associated with many man friends at Mercer. Where was she doing that, you think? At the Leslie's place. And at one time was inmate at the House of Ill Fame near Rhinelander. That was the academy. House of Ill Fame is a brothel, and inmate is someone who works there, was the term. They would charge anybody who was found at a brothel as an inmate when they raided it. It didn't matter if you were managing the place, if you were a bodyguard, if you were just found on that property, employed there for any reason at all, that's what they would charge you with. Mrs. Harper told the jury that she had left for lack of flambeau, but Mr. Voss, who happened to be the town constable at the time, saw her standing behind the shed near the Harper's restaurant. So if you look at this map here, I got this red square around where the Harper restaurant is. That X is the Leslie's place. And that box behind the Harpers, that's the shed they're talking about. So she was peeking around the corner right before the guy died. She stood behind the shed for several minutes and was peeking around the corner. It's rather suspicious. So later on, upon questioning and searching around, they found that she also had arsenic, which is what killed Melvin. And she admitted that she got it from Mr. Leslie. It was sitting around his place, but she was only killing rats with it. And that's what Joe said he bought it from the pharmacy for 10 years ago, because it was no longer available commercially. So he just happened to have that deadly poison sitting around. And she just happened to get it to kill some rats that morning. And then Melvin died. This all went to court. And shockingly enough, they could not prove that she put that poison in those eggs and she was responsible for it. They could not prove that. She was found not guilty and let go, and got to live the rest of her life. She sued for spousal support for a couple years afterwards, because there was no crime committed that was on record for a reason for the divorce. And, a husband can't just leave his wife destitute back in those days. So she was awarded a little bit of spousal support for a couple years until in 1943, she married another man by the name of Mott, who happened to be a deputy in Lac de Flambeau. And they got to live long, happy lives together. And got to be someone else's wicked stepmother. And I don't know if she ever did anything else nefarious, but she had the longest life out of anybody that we're going to be talking about today. Out of anybody, surprisingly enough. So yeah, that's how the story of Melvin died. And she was, a tenant, you could say, of the Leslies and Edith there. The next person we're going to talk about is Miss Mabel King / Angus Knoll. Now this was tricky. This one fooled me. Because when you look up Mabel King and you go through censuses in the area, you do find a Mabel King in the census for Minocqua listed as a prostitute. But that is not this Mabel King. There are apparently two different Mabel Kings running around as prostitutes in the area at the same time, because this Mabel King signed her real name on a marriage license. And that's how we know her real name is Angus Knoll. And that marriage is kind of what brings everything to a head in her story. Um, she is a well-known resident of the Italian section of Hurley, which is a nice way of saying not a great neighborhood. She was a prostitute. And she was well known up there and happened to be 39 years for quite a while by the time they arrested her. She somehow convinced some guy named Matea to marry her. He was an old widow, I believe in his 70s, and lived on a farm and had some property. And they were going to get married, and they did get married. And that's why we have this marriage license here that we found. And a couple days afterwards, she's still partying, and his best friend is over, and she's having a good time drinking with him. And that's when Mr. Matea starts to think, hey, he starts getting paranoid. He starts to think that they're out to get him. They want his stuff. They want him out of the picture, is what he starts to believe. Um, Maybe they did, and maybe he overheard something, or maybe he's just elderly and people aged a lot quicker at that time and was suffering from some issues. I don't know. But either way, he thought that's what was happening. And he went and gets a gun and comes and shoots both of them. He kills his best friend, Dominic. I can't even pronounce that last name. It starts with a C and it's very Italian. And he shoots him dead right there in the house, and he shoots his wife, his new wife. But she lives. She is a real tough lady. Not only does she live, she packs her wounds and then she takes a nap and gets up in the morning and walks out of the house and goes and finds a police officer and is like, hey, I've been shot. You want to take me to a hospital? And that's how the police discover what happened. So she goes to a hospital, they arrest him, and she goes to, and he goes to Waupun Correctional Facility. You can see over here on the far right, her when they were talking to her as she was getting released from the hospital. On the way to jail, because they were charging her a vagrancy at the time as well, Miss Matea asked what penalty her husband would probably be receiving if convicted of the slaying. She was told that he'll probably be sent to the state penitentiary prison at Waupun. If he goes to Waupun, that'll mean a quick divorce for me. Whoopee! She still had bullet in her chest at the time with a bandage over it. I was walking out of the hospital going to jail while that was happening. Yeah, a tough lady. She gets released and she's going to go work in Mercer at the Mareski Saloon. That was the brute that, or the bully we talked about earlier, who opens up a saloon in the same building that the Leslies had one in. It was kind of like a duplex bar. One bar on one side of the wall, one bar on the other. The Leslies also rented the rooms overhead as well, and they lived up there. And she went to go work as a hostess and barmaid at that place. This is 1930. All the events we're talking about right now happened in 1930 within a couple months of each other. In May of 1930 here is what we're talking about. The previous one was I believe, April. So all 1930 was a very busy year for Mercer and for the people that were writing news reports about Mercer. So Mabel survived the shooting and goes to work as a barmaid again. All right. Oh, we already did. Sorry, wrong button there. There we go. So she's working at the bar next to the Leslies. And the Leslies are operating the bar and the rooms upstairs. And the Leslies are known to have loud arguments with each other that the neighbors can hear. It's not a secret around town. Not as bad as Earl, but they do have these arguments that are very apparent to everyone within earshot. People have heard those sort of couples before. These two are married. This event happens in June 22nd, 1930. Apparently, the owner of that building was evicting the Leslies, but hadn't quite told them yet. But he did tell Benny Mareski, who was sick of their antics and wanted them gone and away from him. He was not a patient man. And he comes home and he sees Edith upstairs. And this is the event that took place essentially. Here we go. He claims that she was just upstairs. She refused to get out of the house. He picks her up gently, sets her outside. And Miss Mabel King, who we talked about earlier, she was Hurley Street, the one who was the bullet wounds. She was staying at that place at the time in the bed upstairs, renting that out. At the time, literally in that bed. So he goes upstairs, he kicks them both out. She claims, and they both claim, that he then administered a severe beating to Edith, a really, really bad one. Multiple contusions to the head, you know, bits of broken skull around the eye. It is bad. Talking about serious head injuries. And he beats her and leaves her there, and one of Joe's friends picks her up and takes her someplace, and not sure quite what happens after that. But he contends that no, he just set her out there. Any beating that he noticed, that was her husband that did that. That wasn't him. You know, that was the two contending ones. One had a witness that says yes, it was him, that Mabel King, but in the eyes of the law and the judge, this was a prostitute that he kicked out of Hurley twice. Married one old man for his money and somehow survived being shot and then went back to work. So in the eyes of the law, she wasn't a good witness. Things have different standards today, but it was quite different back then. And the only other witness was the guy's bartender, who, if you work for Benny, he probably has a good reason to keep his mouth shut about whatever happened and just go along with what the boss says at this point. Because the Leslies are going to be out of the picture, and so is this new barmaid. So he backs up his boss's story and says, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're in court over this because he eventually does get arrested and then let go because there's no proof to anything at that point. Here is the testimony that Mabel King gave. Tell the truth, you dirty liar, interrupted Mabel. Tell them that we were over in your joint in Ironwood and we had a lot of drinks during the afternoon. This is after Benny says that he doesn't know who Mabel is. Never seen that woman. I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, yes, you do. I work for you and I just was drinking at your saloon up in Hurley. Don't lie. And I used to hang out over at your saloon in Sandrock and work from there too. You're a dirty, rotten liar, Benny, basically. And he didn't have any explanation for that other than shrugging it off, you know, and he talks to a lot of prostitutes. How does he remember who's who? So they let that go and so forth. Edith is let go and is with Joe at that point. The next 8 days are a little confusing because we don't know what happened between this beating and when Edith died on July 1st. She survived for a couple days after this beating, and then passed away. So the major question is, did this beating kill her or did something else kill her in that meantime? So she is beaten this time, and there's some bad blood between Joe and Benny Mareskia, obviously. Let's move on to the next slide. And supposedly there was some sort of fight that the Leslies had planned. Joe was going to get 4 of his guys, and he saw Benny down there, 5 of his guys, and they were going to go in, they were going to fight. And then according to the newspaper record, that didn't happen. No, they didn't want to admit to it happen, at least in court, but that was what was going to happen. He admitted to planning it, at least. And then you saw in the previous newspaper article when they're talking after all this is over, that Joe had a lot of scraped up knuckles like he had been in a fight. So maybe there was an altercation between Joe Leslie's people and Benny's people that went down in the meantime. I don't know, but we do know that the Leslies went out to the Lake of the Falls right before Edith died. For some reason, they're sitting around and drinking at a tavern / house owned by the Devine family out there, Adam Devine, I believe, yes, and his son, Bud. They were drinking, having a good time, and Mrs. Leslie complained about the cold. Does anybody know anything about head injuries? Feeling cold is kind of a sign when your body isn't working right and your nervous system isn't doing what it should. So she's complaining about the cold, and having some issues. She decides that she's going to, hang out with the guys, and she's in the tavern, and then she goes outside and comes back in and falls down. They pick her up, they put her in a chair, give her some blankets, she sits there, and they decide, all right, let's go back to Mercer, we're gonna go to the tavern. Yeah, I don't know. And then they put her in the car, covered with blankets, go to the tavern, and apparently she says, I don't want to go inside, just leave me in the truck where it's nice and warm right now. And they do so, and then they come back and she's dead. Um, that is their side of the story. We don't really know what happened. People, the two men said they did hear about a fight they had, but that was months ago. They were hanging out and they said they didn't see a fight between the Leslies right beforehand or any sort of beating and didn't see a reason why there should be one. And there was some, discrepancy over who exactly was out there at Lake of the Falls. A lot of the people that were there did not want to give their name. And then in later newspaper reports, you do see their name, notably the Moffats. So there's a little bit of sketchy business going on there as well. So Miss Leslie dies. Edith dies. Here's her little obituary exhibit. The village of Mercer is again in the limelight as the result of the death on Tuesday afternoon of Mrs. Joseph Leslie, who was severely beaten and bruised. Her wounds causing her death at 5 o'clock that afternoon. When her body was examined, it was found to be a mass of bruises, wounds. Both her eyes were discolored, and a post-mortem examination showed a fracture of the skull right above the eye, which undoubtedly was the immediate cause of her death. This went to court, and there were numerous accounts about what happened. They had some medical examiners in that gave a report, and the jury said Benny definitely did it. One medical examiner said Benny definitely did it. There's no way Edith should have survived from these wounds. Two other medical examiners said there's no way she could have survived from those wounds from that day to this day and then died. If she survived initially, she should have stayed alive. I'm not a doctor, but it seems kind of weird. The jury at first found Benny guilty, and then the judge said no. Two medical examiners outweighs one medical examiner. Benny's not guilty, but he's still held in court. He doesn't come up with that determination quite yet, because in the meantime, Joe is on the loose, and Joe is not a happy man. His wife just died. He has no job to speak of. He just got evicted from his restaurant. He still has living quarters upstairs he's got to get out of soon, and he's on a bender. The police told him they don't want to see him near a drop of alcohol, period, or else he's going to jail. And he's not going to listen to that, of course not. It's Mercer, so he was having a couple drinks. He starts drinking in Mercer and makes his way down to Mantwish, goes over to the Laughlin residence where they have a place where they serve alcohol or food and has some drinks there. And then he goes to the Alvies and then back to the Laughins and is seeing some friends and just getting annihilated. This guy is not doing good. We'll move on. So he ends up dead that night. Yeah, he ends up dead that night. Um, he tries to leave the Laughlin residence, and Mr. Laughlin physically tries to restrain him after trying to put Joe to bed a couple times, and then gives up and says, "Go on, whatever, Joe." And Joe tells him that he's going to go to Mercer. He's got a gun waiting there, and he's going to take care of things. And let's see, there it goes. He claims that Iron County authorities that currently are trying to frame him for the death of his wife. And that he's going to go get his gun and shoot some of the officials and then commit suicide. He is not in a healthy place right now, to say the least. There we go. He's going to get a gun and go to Mercer and shoot some officials. So he goes out of the road, and that's the last anybody sees him alive. He is found dead on Highway 51. You can see on this map here, that's Highway 51, the long road that curves. And Joe's body is found right up there, where that intersection of Highway 51 and that other road is that I forgot the name of. The Lappin residence was down there at the intersection of around, I think that's 47 down there, like you're going to Lac du Flambeau. That's where he was found dead in the highway. It was a foggy night. Somebody hit him with a car, apparently. There were skid marks on the road. He was found with bruises to the leg, to the head, and to the shoulder, and multiple other places, and was found on the road. The question is, did somebody do that on purpose? Or was it just a random accident on the highway with a drunk person wandering into traffic in a really foggy environment like we had this morning? You saw how thick fog can be. So that's the real mystery of how he died as well. Eventually, when he does die, the judge lets Benny out of jail and they dismiss the case. Say, Benny, you're not found guilty, case dismissed. And he goes on to run saloons up in Hurley, but doesn't do business in Mercer anymore. Probably not a well-liked guy. If we go back there, you can see, oh, not that one. There we go. In the court when Joe was giving his testimony, it was a cold night. It's well timed to kick a woman out of a place. You killed my woman, said Joe. And pointed at him. And then see, I don't have the other quote here. And then Ben accused him of lying and said he could find a witness to prove it, being the bartender. There's also some accounts of Benny just wandering around with a club to keep things in line around his place and that sort of thing, and how he didn't really fit in. There we go. You are not the type that can get along in our town, said Leslie. You carry a club around with you all the time. You were looking for me. We were going to gang on you down there. We had four fellows picked, but you had your gang with you, and the attack did not occur. He said that in a courtroom. He's not going to say we went and attacked you in front of a judge. So it's not a well-liked man around Mercer, and he didn't operate here anymore after this case. All right. So on that kind of ended that chain of crime wave that happened in Mercer around the life of Edith Short there. The short life of Edith Short, I should say. But in between there, to give you context, there was a lot of other things that happened. In 1920, there was the Mercer shootout on Highway 51 of the booze caravan. I'm not going to get into all the details because I'm trying to keep this reasonably short. But just to give you some context, there was a caravan of bootleggers that are coming from Milwaukee to deliver booze to the taverns up here, driven by the tavern owners, I should say. And they get tipped off by somebody saying, hey, the prohibition agents are laying out roadblocks for you. They're going to ambush you at these certain places. Don't go, man. And they don't quite believe it at first. So they get busted up in Rhinelander on the way here. And 2 cars get pulled over and 4 others speed through the roadblock because the police don't have enough manpower to take out 6 giant sedans laden with men and alcohol and guns. And that's when they're like, all right, we're going to take this serious. Some of them did at least. So the people around Mercer, they were smart. Ed Everson and another tavern owner, they take back roads to get here, and they even stop at other resorts and go, I'm going to go hang out at the Spider Lake Resort for 2 days. I don't need to go back to work quite yet. I'm going to wait for the heat to cool down. And the other one goes down to Park Falls and does the same. A fourth one goes all the way up to Marinesco, over to Ironwood to his saloon, goes the really long way through Winchester to deliver his booze, and he goes through just fine. But one man, or 3, I should say, decide, you know what? They stopped us in Minocqua. They're not going to get us in Mercer. So they speed on through to get pulled over again, 9 miles north of town here. They try and speed through that. 1 out of 3 cars gets 2 damage, 2 make it, but the second one ends up stuck in the road, and prohibition agents end up shooting him like 3 times in the back after exchanging fire once. And that turns into a big case. Meanwhile, 1920, there's a series of violent robberies that happen in Mercer. A couple brothels and saloons were broken into by bandits who raid the safes. And then that again happens in 1930, around the same time that the northern gets raided by prohibition agents and it gets locked down completely. In 1923, there is a corrupt cop going around Mercer, shaking down the residents, demanding protection money, and eventually he gets charged for racketeering when he, comes to term with his crimes. So the story I told today is a kind of a long one that follows one woman's life, and there are a lot of events in it. But in the context of other things going on, this is just a small part of the history. It was a very sketchy time in that period, and there's a lot of other stuff going on as well. In the future, I can elaborate on those events, and we can talk about those for future presentations like the shootout or the bandits that were going around robbing the places.